The gray mare stumbled crossing the creek, and Della felt the impact travel through the saddle straight into her bones. Not a full collapse. Pockets had too much pride for that. But the limp afterward told the whole story. Another shoe gone, another expense Della couldn't afford. Another reminder that everything eventually falls apart if you ride it long enough. She slid down from the saddle and crouched beside the mare's front hoof, water soaking through her boots. The creek ran colder than it should have for late August. Strange. She splashed some on her face and neck, then straightened to stare at the town ahead. Creedmore. The sign read 28. Someone had scratched through 31 recently enough the wood still looked raw. 3 people gone. Not long ago either, if somebody bothered updating the count. Della exhaled slowly. Yeah, we're stopping here. The mare snorted. I don't like it either. The heat pressed down heavy. Not desert heat. That at least had the decency to be dry. This was valley heat. Wet heat that stuck in your lungs and made breathing feel like work. The kind that reminded you summer wasn't done punishing people yet. She grabbed the reins and started walking. Pockets limped beside her with the patient resignation of an animal that understood survival better than most humans. The town got quieter the closer they came. Not peaceful. Empty. Della had seen towns like this before, places where hope left one family at a time until only the stubborn and the stuck-around remained. Places where the future arrived years ago, took one look, and kept riding. A screen door slammed somewhere. 2 hammer strikes rang out. Then nothing. Most frontier towns layered sounds over each other. Arguments, wagon wheels, dogs barking, drunk laughter spilling from saloons before noon. Creedmore sounded like people conserving energy, like noise cost something they couldn't spare. Della hated towns like that, not because they were miserable, because they reminded her of places she'd already buried in memory. The blacksmith shop sat near the center road. Della spotted it by the smoke rising lazy and gray against the red cliffs beyond. The smith turned out to be a broad-shouldered woman with iron-gray hair tied so tight it looked like punishment. Sparks burst around her while she worked metal in the forge. She looked up once as Della approached. One glance, that was all frontier people needed to size up a stranger. Traveling woman, little money, tired horse. No husband nearby. Too old to be naive. Too young to be finished. The smith wiped sweat from her forehead with a leather-gloved hand. Horse threw a shoe. Notice that, Della said. The woman made a sound somewhere between a snort and a laugh. 3 bits. Fair. The smith looked disappointed Della hadn't argued. Most lonely towns survived on small entertainments. A good haggle could stretch into conversation. Conversation killed hours, but Della was too tired for performance. While the shoe heated in the forge, she stood beside Pockets and studied the street. 2 boys hauled water barrels outside the saloon, moving slow like the heat made their limbs heavier. A preacher swept dust off church steps nobody used anymore. A dog slept under a wagon missing 2 wheels, ribs showing through mangy fur. And beside the general store, tucked into a strip of shade that barely existed, sat 3 children. Della noticed the oldest first, boy around 12. Maybe 13 if life had been especially cruel. Too thin, dark hair falling into darker eyes, trying hard not to look afraid. Kids who lost parents young developed the same expression eventually, that permanent tension around the eyes like they were bracing for bad news before it arrived. Like flinching had become reflex. Beside him sat a girl maybe 8 years old, braiding pieces of dry grass together with complete concentration. Her dress looked clean but patched in 3 places. Someone cared enough to mend it. That mattered. And a few feet away from both of them sat the youngest. Little boy, 4, maybe 5 years old, holding a wooden spoon in both hands. Just holding it, not playing, not talking, not moving. Just sitting there in the dust watching the road like he expected somebody to appear carrying supper and explanations. Something inside Della tightened before she could stop it. She immediately resented herself for it. She'd spent years learning how not to get involved. Getting involved cost money, time, grief, sometimes all 3 at once, and she had none to spare. Pockets tugged sideways toward a water trough, pulling Della closer to the children than she'd intended. The youngest boy looked up, big dark eyes, quiet eyes, not shy. There was a difference Della recognized too well. Shy children still reached toward the world a little, testing whether it might reach back. This boy looked like he'd already learned the world usually didn't, like he'd stopped asking questions because answers hurt worse than silence. She won't bite, Della said softly, nodding toward the mare. The oldest boy answered before the little one could react. He doesn't talk. Protective tone, sharp, automatic, the kind of defense that came from practice. Della glanced at him. Doesn't talk or stop talking. The boy frowned. What's the difference? Big one. The smith hammered the new shoe into place behind them. Clang, clang, clangang. The sound echoed sharp across the empty street, bouncing off storefronts nobody bothered painting anymore. The little boy flinched at each strike but still didn't speak. Della knew trauma when she saw it. Not because she was educated, because life educated people whether they asked or not. She'd seen enough broken things, people included, to recognize when something inside somebody stopped working right. The girl kept braiding grass like the conversation wasn't happening, but her fingers moved faster now. Nervous energy. The older boy watched Della with the kind of suspicion that came from adults disappointing him too many times already. You passing through? He asked. Looks like it. Good. Della raised an eyebrow. That's honest. People who stop here don't stay long. Better they don't try. Your philosophy or somebody else's? The boy's jaw tightened. Mine. The smith finished shoeing pockets while Della watered the mare. The horse drank deep and long, sides heaving. They'd pushed too hard today. Tomorrow needed to be slower. Eventually, Della asked, casual as possible, Those kids belong to somebody? The blacksmith took too long answering. She set down her hammer and wiped both hands on her apron, not looking at Della. That depends what you mean by belong. Della waited. Silence usually got better answers than questions. Father died winter before last, lung sickness. Mother lasted till spring when fever took her. The smith shrugged like tragedy was weather. Uncle's raising them now. Doing a bad job? The woman slid the hoof stand aside and straightened. For a moment she just looked at Della with the tired eyes of someone who'd watched too many things fall apart. He's trying. That was not the same thing as succeeding. Della thanked her, paid the 3 bits, and should have left after that. Really should have. Trinco Wells sat another day's ride south. Steady work waited there. Cooking, cleaning, $40 by winter if the ranch widow kept her word. $40 mattered, especially to women with no family left. Especially to women getting older in a world that stopped valuing women the moment their youth wore off. But instead of mounting the horse, Della walked into the general store. The door creaked on hinges that needed oil. Inside smelled like dust and old wood and resignation. The dry goods shelves looked half empty already. Bad sign. Stores that couldn't keep stock were stores circling the drain. She'd seen it before. First the merchandise disappeared, then the customers. Then the building itself, boarded up and forgotten. A thin man stood behind the counter doing arithmetic in a ledger with the exhausted concentration of someone constantly losing a fight against numbers. Mid-30s, maybe. Thinning hair. Shoulders hunched like he carried weight nobody else could see. Need something? He asked without looking up. Della studied the shelves. Beans, flour, salt pork. A few bruised apples that cost too much. Coffee expensive enough to qualify as robbery. She bought flour anyway. And dried apricots. And vanilla extract she absolutely did not need. The man finally looked at her when she set everything on the counter. You staying the night? Maybe. Back room's 50 cents, loft's 25. I'll take the loft. He nodded distractedly and made a note in the ledger. His handwriting looked cramped and angry, numbers that wouldn't cooperate no matter how hard you wrote them. Then Della asked, Those children outside yours? He stiffened. Why? Just asking. They're my sisters. Della noticed his fingers tightening around the pencil until his knuckles went white. Boy doesn't talk, she said carefully. He used to. The answer landed hard in the quiet store. Final. Like a door closing. Della didn't ask more. People in pain usually hated questions. They especially hated strangers asking them. She paid for the room and carried her saddlebag up to the loft. Small space, hot, dusty, but private. A bedroll lay in the corner with a blanket that had seen better decades. She dropped her bag and sat on the floor with her back against the wall. Through the gaps in the floorboard, she could hear the man below still scratching numbers in his ledger. The sound of trying, the sound of failing quietly. Outside, the sun started its slow descent behind the cliffs. The heat didn't break. It never did this time of year, not until full dark. And even then it just waited in the corners, ready to come back the moment morning arrived. Della closed her eyes and listened to Creedmore settle into evening. A wagon rolled past outside. Someone coughed. A woman's voice called something Della couldn't make out. And underneath it all, that same empty silence, like the town was holding its breath, waiting for something that never came. She thought about the 3 children sitting in the dust. She thought about the littlest one holding that spoon. She thought about how some people stopped talking, not because they had nothing to say, but because saying things hurt too much. Then she forced herself to stop thinking about it. Not her problem, not her town, not her children. She'd learned that lesson the hard way years ago. Getting involved didn't save people. It just meant you drowned alongside them when everything went under. By evening, the temperature finally dropped enough for breathing not to feel like work. Della climbed down from the loft after washing trail dust from her face using half a basin of stale water. The water turned brown immediately. She'd been on the road too long. Everything felt gritty. Her skin, her clothes, her thoughts. The store kitchen sat behind the main room, small, cluttered, poorly organized. Whoever cooked there had given up trying a while ago. Dishes piled in a basin. Flour dusted the counter. A pot sat on the stove with something burned stuck to the bottom. The smell of old grease hung in the air. She found the uncle sitting alone at the table, staring at unpaid invoices spread across the wood like evidence of failure. "You mind if I use the stove?" she asked. He blinked, looked up, took a moment to focus on her like she'd pulled him back from somewhere far away. For what? To cook. Why? Della almost laughed, because apparently nobody had offered kindness in Creedmore long enough for people to recognize it anymore. "Because your kitchen looks hungry," she answered. The man stared at her for several seconds. His eyes were the same dark color as the children's. Same shape, too. Family resemblance ran deep. Then he slowly nodded. "Suit yourself." Della rolled up her sleeves and got to work. Cooking always calmed her. Not because life made sense inside kitchens, because kitchens followed rules. Heat transformed things. Time transformed things. Patience mattered. Unlike people. She found what she needed in the cupboards and the small cold box outside. Not much, but enough. Cooking was about working with what you had, not what you wished for. She mixed flour with water and lard for flatbread. The dough came together rough and sticky. She kneaded it longer than necessary, working out tension in her shoulders while her hands pushed and folded. Dropped salt pork into a cast iron pan. The fat sizzled immediately. Good sound. Honest sound. Added dried chilies from a tin she carried everywhere. Her mother's recipe. Or close enough. Memory changed recipes over time until you couldn't remember what was original and what you'd invented to fill the gaps. The smell spread quickly through the little building. Real food. Not scraps. Not survival meals scraped together from whatever didn't spoil. Actual supper. The children appeared one at a time like nervous stray cats testing whether the food was worth the risk. The girl first. She stood in the doorway watching Della with big eyes that missed nothing. Then the older brother, pretending not to care, hands shoved in his pockets, shoulders trying for casual and landing on defensive. The little one came last, still carrying the spoon, still silent. Della pretended not to notice. "Sit if you're sitting," she said without turning around. Nobody moved at first. Then chairs scraped softly across wood. The kitchen filled with sounds missing from it for too long. Small sounds. Breathing, movement, expectation. The uncle stayed at the table, papers forgotten now, watching the children with an expression Della couldn't quite name. Grief, maybe. Or guilt. Probably both. Della stirred the pot slowly. The pork had started rendering fat. She added water, then beans, then salt. Not too much. Just enough. Outside, the sunset burned crimson against the cliffs, painting everything the color of old blood. Inside, the fire crackled beneath the stove. And without meaning to, Della started humming. Old tune. Older than memory. Something her mother used to sing while cooking beside a coal stove in a mining town long gone now. Della had been maybe 6 when she learned it, or 7. Young enough the melody lived in her bones instead of her brain. Not a happy song, but steady. A surviving song. The kind women sang when their hands were busy and their minds needed somewhere else to go. The girl stopped moving first. Her hands went still in her lap. Then the older boy. His shoulders dropped slightly. The defensive posture softened. Della kept stirring, kept humming. The melody wandered through the kitchen like something alive, like something searching. Then she heard it. Another sound, tiny, uncertain. Behind her. The little boy, trying to hum along. The sound barely existed, like somebody remembering how to use their voice after forgetting it somewhere deep inside themselves, after locking it away where it couldn't hurt anymore. Nobody in the room breathed. Della didn't turn around, didn't react. Some moments broke if you looked directly at them, so she kept stirring the beans, kept humming. The little sound behind her grew slightly stronger, not confident, just brave. She heard the girl make a small noise, not quite a gasp, almost a sob. The older brother's chair scraped. She heard him stand, heard fabric rustle like he'd moved suddenly. The uncle went completely still. But Della just kept stirring, kept humming, let the melody carry whatever needed carrying. The little boy followed along, his voice thin and wavering but there. Present, real. And then, "What's that song?" 3 words, smallest voice in the world. But the room changed the moment they appeared. The sister gasped for real this time. A sharp intake of breath that sounded like hope and terror mixed together. The older brother shoved backward from the table so fast his chair nearly tipped. His hand flew to his mouth. The uncle dropped the invoice he'd been holding. It drifted to the floor unnoticed. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The little boy looked frightened immediately afterward, like maybe the words escaped without permission, like he'd done something wrong by speaking. Della turned carefully, very carefully. She crouched down slow so she was closer to his level. Not all the way. Kids didn't trust adults who tried too hard, but enough to show she was listening. "It's just a supper song," she said gently. The boy swallowed hard. His knuckles were white around the wooden spoon. "Again?" The older brother covered his mouth with both hands. His eyes filled. He turned away quickly, shoulders shaking. The girl started crying silently, tears running down her face while she smiled. The uncle stood abruptly and walked to the window, stood there with his back to everyone. His shoulders rose and fell too fast, too uneven. Della felt something painful move through her chest. Not joy, something rougher, something that hurt before it healed. Hope always did that. "Again," she said softly. "Yeah, I can do that." She sang while serving supper. The words came back slowly. Her voice wasn't good. Never had been. But it was steady. And sometimes steady mattered more than good. She filled bowls with beans and pork and flatbread torn into pieces, set them in front of the children. The girl ate like she hadn't seen food in days. The older boy ate slower, trying to maintain some dignity while his hands shook. The little one ate 3 bites, then put down his spoon, the wooden one, not the one Della had given him, and looked at her. "You staying?" Della paused, bowl half filled in her hand. Everyone waited for her answer. She should have said no. Should have said she was leaving First Light. Trinco Wells. $40. Work waiting. Life continuing somewhere else like it always did. But she looked at those 3 children, and at the uncle standing by the window trying to pull himself together, and at the kitchen that finally didn't sound empty anymore. "Maybe," she said. "For a bit." The little boy nodded like that was enough. "Okay." Then he picked up his spoon again and took another bite. The older brother let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his lungs for months. The girl reached over and squeezed her little brother's hand. And for the first time since riding into Creedmore, Della thought maybe staying wasn't the stupidest thing she'd ever done. Maybe it was only the second stupidest. After supper, the children helped clean up without being asked. The girl washed dishes. The older boy dried them. The little one carefully put spoons away in a drawer, arranging them by size with complete concentration. The uncle finally turned from the window. "Thank you," he said quietly. Della nodded. "He hasn't spoken since April," the man continued. "Not one word. Doctor in Spring Valley said maybe he never would again, said sometimes grief does that. Takes your voice and doesn't give it back. Doctors don't know everything. No, I guess they don't. He looked at his nephew, the little one, with an expression that broke Della's heart a little. I've tried, he said. I've tried everything I could think of, but I'm not good at this. I'm not good at being what they need.
Nobody is, Della said. Not at first. How long does it take? I don't know. Long enough you think you're failing, then a little longer. The man almost smiled. Didn't quite make it, but almost. You got kids? Had one. Lost her. The words came out flat. She hadn't meant to say them at all. They just appeared. I'm sorry. Della shrugged. Long time ago. That was a lie. It had been 8 years. 8 years felt like yesterday, and a lifetime at the same time. That why you're... He gestured vaguely at everything. The kitchen, the children, the supper that had brought a voice back from wherever it had been hiding. Maybe, Della said. Or maybe I just hate seeing food go to waste. He knew she was deflecting. She could tell. But he let it go. Room's yours as long as you want it, he said. And if you're willing to cook, I'll knock off half the cost. That's generous. That's desperate. Della almost smiled. Honesty was rare enough to be refreshing. Deal, she said. She climbed back up to the loft after the children went to bed. They slept upstairs in the room above the store. She could hear them moving around. Water splashing. The older boy's voice saying something low. The girl giggling once. Then quiet. Della lay on the bedroll staring at the ceiling. Moonlight came through the gaps in the roof, painting silver stripes across the dark. She thought about Trinco Wells. About the $40. About the life she'd been heading toward that looked exactly like the life she'd been living. Moving, working, surviving. Repeat. Nothing wrong with that. Survival mattered, but somewhere along the way she'd stopped living and started just not dying. There was a difference. She knew that now. Below her, the uncle moved around the store, putting things away, locking doors, preparing for another day of fighting numbers that wouldn't cooperate. And further away in the room above, 3 children slept. One of them had spoken today, 3 words. Then 3 more, 6 words total. But they'd changed everything. Della closed her eyes and listened to Creedmore settle into night. Tomorrow she'd probably regret staying. Tomorrow she'd probably remember all the reasons getting involved was a mistake. Tomorrow she'd probably feel that familiar pull toward the horizon, toward the next town, toward the safety of leaving before things got complicated. But tonight she'd sung an old song, and a little boy had remembered his voice, and that felt like enough of a reason to stay a while longer, even if she didn't quite believe it yet. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying dust and heat, and the promise of another hard day tomorrow. Inside the store, everything went quiet, and in the silence, Della finally let herself stop running, at least for now, at least for tonight, maybe for a little longer. She fell asleep humming that old surviving song, the one her mother taught her, the one that had traveled so far, the one that, for reasons she didn't fully understand, had brought a voice back from the dark. Morning arrived too early and too hot. Della woke to the sound of hammering somewhere in town and immediately regretted every decision that led to sleeping on a floor in a storage loft above a failing general store in a town with 28 people who couldn't leave and nowhere to go if they did. Her back hurt. Her neck hurt. Everything hurt in that specific way that reminded you 37 was closer to 40 than 30, and your body kept receipts. She sat up slowly and looked through the gaps in the floorboards. The store below was empty. The uncle must have already opened. Morning light cut through the front windows in dusty shafts that made everything look older than it was. She climbed down the ladder and found the uncle behind the counter, doing the same arithmetic from yesterday. Different numbers. Same losing battle. Coffee? He asked without looking up. Please. He nodded toward a pot sitting on the stove in the back. Help yourself. Fair warning, it's terrible. He wasn't wrong. The coffee tasted like someone had burned dirt and added regret. But it was hot, and it was caffeinated, and that was enough. Della stood in the doorway between the store and the kitchen, holding the chipped mug, watching Creedmore wake up outside. The 2 boys from yesterday hauled more water barrels. Same slow movements, same defeated posture. The preacher swept the same church steps. The dog still slept under the same broken wagon.
Nothing changed in towns like this. That was the problem. Change required energy and hope and money. Creedmore had run out of all three. Kids still sleeping? Della asked. Samuel took them to the creek early, trying to cool off before the heat gets bad. The uncle finally looked up from his ledger. I'm Thomas, by the way. Figured we should know names if you're staying. Della. Just Della? Just Della. He nodded like that answered something. The kids... He stopped. Started again. The little one's name is James. Girl's Lucy. Oldest is Samuel. He protective. You noticed. Hard not to. Thomas set down his pencil and rubbed his eyes. Their father, my brother-in-law, he was a good man. Worked himself half to death trying to keep the farm going. Then winter came hard 2 years ago. Lung sickness took him before spring. And their mother? Sarah. He said the name carefully, like it still hurt. She held on through winter, kept the kids fed, kept them together. Then fever came through in April, took her in 3 days. Della sipped the terrible coffee and said nothing. James stopped talking the day we buried her, Thomas continued. Just stopped. Middle of the service he was crying, then he wasn't. Went completely quiet. Hasn't said a word since. Until last night. 6 words, Della said. 6 more than yesterday. That's something. Is it? Thomas looked at her with exhausted eyes. Or is it just another thing I'll fail at? You're feeding them, housing them. That's not failing. That's the bare minimum. They need more than that. They need... He gestured helplessly. I don't know what they need. I'm a shopkeeper. I sell flour and nails and coffee that tastes like punishment. I don't know how to raise kids who've lost everything. Nobody does. You just do it anyway. That's not comforting. Wasn't trying to be. He almost smiled. Then the door opened and the moment vanished. A woman walked in carrying a basket, mid-40s, tired face, dress patched in so many places it looked more patch than dress. Morning, Thomas. Morning, Martha. She nodded at Della. You're new. Passing through. They all say that. Martha set the basket on the counter. Eggs, maybe a dozen. Trade for sugar? Thomas weighed the eggs with his eyes. Half pound? Half pound's fair. He measured out sugar into a paper sack while Martha studied Della with the frank curiosity of someone who'd stopped caring about politeness years ago. You cook? She asked. Some. Heard you fed Thomas's kids last night. Heard James talked. News traveled fast in small towns, faster in dying ones where nothing else happened. He said a few words, Della confirmed. Martha nodded slowly. That boy's been silent so long, I thought maybe he'd stay that way. Sometimes grief does that, takes something and keeps it. Sometimes it gives it back. Maybe. She didn't sound convinced. You staying long? Don't know yet. Well, if you do, town could use someone who can cook. Most of us just survive supper. Be nice to enjoy one again. After Martha left, 3 more people came in. All of them looked at Della. All of them asked the same questions with different words. All of them had that same exhausted quality, like existing took more energy than they had to spare. By mid-morning, Della had been studied by half the town's population. Apparently strangers were entertainment when you had nothing else. The children returned around noon, wet from the creek and slightly less miserable than the heat deserved. Lucy ran in first, hair dripping, dress soaked. We saw a frog, she announced to nobody in particular. Samuel followed slower, carrying James on his back. The little boy's arms wrapped around his brother's neck, head resting on Samuel's shoulder, still holding that wooden spoon. Samuel set James down carefully near the counter. He got tired walking back, he explained. Thomas looked up from the ledger. You eat? Apples. We found some wild ones by the water. That's not enough. It's fine. Samuel, I said it's fine. The tension hung there a moment. Thomas looked like he wanted to argue. Didn't. Just went back to his numbers. Lucy noticed Della first. You're still here. Looks like it. Are you staying? Maybe. Can you make breakfast? Uncle Thomas burns everything. I heard that, Thomas said without looking up. It's true, Lucy insisted. Last week he burned oatmeal. Oatmeal! You have to try really hard to burn oatmeal. It was a difficult week, Thomas muttered.
Samuel stayed quiet, watching Della with that same suspicious expression from yesterday, like he was waiting for her to disappoint them, like everyone eventually did. James just stared at her with those big dark eyes. Then he walked over slowly, held up the wooden spoon. "This was Mama's," he said quietly. Everyone froze. 8 words now. Lucy's hand flew to her mouth. Samuel's entire body went rigid. Thomas dropped his pencil. Della crouched down slow. "That's so." James nodded. "She used it for stir stew." 5 more words, 13 total. "Sounds like a good spoon for that," Della said gently. "You use spoons." "I do." "For cooking." "Yep." James studied her seriously, then nodded like he'd made a decision about something. "Okay." He walked back to his siblings and sat down on the floor near the counter, spoon clutched tight. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Samuel made a choked sound and turned away fast, shoulders shaking. Lucy started crying silently, the way she had last night. Thomas stood abruptly and walked to the back room, and Della stayed crouched there, feeling that same painful thing move through her chest. Hope, always arriving with sharp edges. The rest of the day passed slow and hot. Della helped around the store without being asked, swept floors that didn't really need sweeping, organized shelves that desperately did, found 3 jars of preserves hidden behind flour sacks, probably forgotten for months. "These still good?" she asked Thomas. He looked up. "Probably not." She opened one, sniffed. "They're fine." "How do you know?" "You learn things when food matters." Around mid-afternoon, a man came in asking about nails. Thomas sold him a pound. The man paid in coins that looked worn thin from too much use. After he left, Thomas counted the money twice. "Problem?" Della asked. "Just noting what's not here." "He short you?" "No, just noting it anyway." The store felt sad after that. Not because anything happened, because nothing did. Just Thomas counting coins that didn't add up to enough. Just another transaction in a long line of transactions that led nowhere good. By evening, Della decided to cook again. Not because she'd decided to stay, because the kitchen was there and food was there and hunger was there and cooking was the only thing that made sense anymore. She found potatoes in the cold box, onions, some kind of meat she didn't examine too closely, a few carrots that had seen better days but would work if she cut away the bad parts. Thomas appeared while she was chopping. "You don't have to I know. I can pay you. Little bit, not much, but not asking for pay." He frowned. "Then why?" "Because standing still makes me nervous." He understood that. She could tell. "I'm the same way," he said quietly. "That's why I count money that isn't there. Keeps my hands busy, keeps my brain from thinking about everything else." Della nodded and kept chopping. They worked in silence for a while. Thomas brought in firewood, stoked the stove. Della prepared food. The rhythm felt almost comfortable. "You're running from something," Thomas said eventually. It wasn't a question. Della kept her eyes on the cutting board. "Everybody's running from something." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." He accepted that with a shrug. "Fair enough. I won't pry." "Appreciate it." "But if you're staying—" "I didn't say I was staying." "If you're staying," he repeated, "people will ask. They'll want to know your story. Small towns do that." "Let them ask." "They won't like non-answers. They'll survive." Thomas almost smiled. "You're stubborn. You're observant." This time he did smile. Small, quick, but real. The children appeared one by one again, drawn by the smell of actual food. Lucy came first, dragging James by the hand. Samuel followed last, still wearing that defensive posture like armor. "Sit," Della said. They sat. She served stew this time, thick, hot, heavy enough to matter. The kind of meal that stuck to your ribs and reminded you food could be more than fuel. James ate 3 bites, then looked at her. "Mama made stew." "Yeah?" "On Saturdays." Samuel's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "With carrots," James continued, "and potatoes, and the meat from the smokehouse." "Sounds good," Della said carefully. It was good. His voice got quieter. "I miss it." Lucy started crying again, silent tears running down her face while she tried to keep eating.
Samuel set down his fork and stared at his bowl. Thomas had stopped breathing. James looked around at everyone's reaction, and his face crumpled. I said something wrong. No, Samuel said quickly. No, you didn't. Everyone's sad. We're not sad, Lucy whispered. We're happy you're talking. Then why are you crying? Because, her voice broke. Because we missed your voice. James thought about that, then nodded like it made sense. I missed it too, he said quietly. Samuel made that choked sound again, pushed back from the table, walked to the window and stood there with his back to everyone. His shoulders shook. Della kept eating like nothing was happening. Sometimes the best thing you could do was act normal while everything fell apart around you. Stew's good, she said to nobody in particular. Lucy wiped her eyes and took another bite. It's really good. Better than Uncle Thomas's? Everything's better than Uncle Thomas's, Lucy said seriously. Still here, Thomas muttered. Still true, Lucy shot back. James giggled, small sound, unexpected. But there, Samuel turned from the window. His face was wet, but he was almost smiling. She's not wrong, he said to Thomas. You really do burn everything. It was 1 pot of oatmeal. 3 pots, Samuel corrected. 3 pots of oatmeal in 1 week. That was an unusually difficult week. And the eggs last month, Lucy added. And the bread before that, Samuel continued. That bread was an experiment. It was charcoal, both kids said at the same time. Then they started laughing. Not hysterical laughter, just regular kid laughter at their uncle's expense. James joined in, his small voice mixing with his siblings. Thomas looked at them with an expression that broke and healed something at the same time. I'm a terrible cook, he admitted. The worst, Lucy agreed cheerfully. Absolutely awful, Samuel added. Complete disaster, Della said. Thomas looked at her. You too? Just being honest. He shook his head, but he was smiling. Everyone's a critic. After supper, the kids helped clean up again. Lucy washed, Samuel dried. James put spoons away with the same careful concentration. Thomas stood in the doorway watching them with wonder, like he couldn't believe they were laughing, like he'd forgotten they could. Thank you, he said quietly to Della. For what? You know what, Della shrugged. Just made stew. It's more than that. It's exactly that. Don't make it complicated. But it was complicated. They both knew it. The children eventually went upstairs. Della heard them moving around, water splashing, voices talking, normal night sounds. She climbed to the loft and lay down on the bedroll. Sleep didn't come easy. Her mind kept circling back to Trinco Wells, to the $40 waiting there, to the life she'd been heading toward. She should leave tomorrow, should mount pockets at first light and ride south before she got more involved than she already was, because this was temporary. Everything was temporary. Towns died, people left. Staying just meant you were there to watch it fall apart. But then she thought about James talking, about Lucy laughing, about Samuel almost smiling, about Thomas looking at his nibblings like maybe things weren't completely hopeless. And something in her chest tightened. Not hope. She refused to call it that. Just something. Below her, Thomas moved around the store, locking doors, putting things away. Outside, Creedmore settled into another silent night. Della closed her eyes and tried to sleep. Tomorrow, she'd decide about leaving. Tomorrow, she'd be rational. Tomorrow, she'd remember all the reasons staying was a mistake. But tonight, she was tired, and the loft was hot. And somewhere above her, 3 children slept easier than they had in months. That had to count for something, even if she didn't know what yet. She woke in the middle of the night to voices outside. Angry voices. She sat up and moved to the window. 2 men stood in the street arguing, too dark to see faces. But their postures were clear enough. 1 man pushed the other. The second man pushed back. Then they both stopped and walked away in opposite directions. The street went silent again. Della waited. Nothing else happened. She lay back down and stared at the ceiling until dawn. Morning came gray and oppressive. The heat had somehow gotten worse overnight, like the valley was holding its breath before something broke. Della climbed down to find Thomas already at his ledger. You hear that last night? She asked. The arguing? Yeah. Walter and Davis, they fight once a week like clockwork. About what? Everything. Nothing. Doesn't matter. Thomas rubbed his eyes. Town's dying. People get angry when they can't leave and can't fix it. Why can't they leave? Same reason nobody can. No money, no place to go, no way to get there if they did. He gestured at the ledger. I'm 3 months behind on the store mortgage. The bank's being patient, but patience runs out. When it does, I lose this place. Then what? Then you figure something else out. Easy to say. Didn't say it was easy. The door opened before Thomas could respond. The blacksmith walked in. Same iron gray hair, same tired eyes. Thomas. Margaret. She nodded at Della. You're still here. Observant town, Della muttered. Small town, Margaret corrected. We notice when someone new doesn't run immediately. She turned to Thomas. Need to talk to you. About? Town meeting tonight. Everyone's coming. Thomas frowned. About what? About whether we're staying or leaving. The words hung heavy in the dusty air. Leaving where? Thomas asked carefully. Anywhere but here. There's talk of forming a wagon train, heading west, Oregon maybe, or California. Somewhere with water, work, future. That's insane, Thomas said flatly. Half the people here are too old to travel. The other half can't afford supplies. They're desperate enough to try anyway. When? Before winter if we're doing it, which means deciding now. Thomas looked like someone had punched him. I can't leave. I've got the store, the kids. I can't just... That's why we're meeting. To talk it through, see who's serious, see who's staying. Margaret glanced at Della. You should come too. I'm not part of this town. You fed Thomas's kids. You got James talking. That makes you part of it whether you want to be or not. I'm leaving soon anyway. Then it won't matter if you sit in on one meeting. Della wanted to argue, wanted to say she didn't get involved in town politics or town problems or town anything, but Margaret was already leaving. Tonight, she called back. After supper, church building. The door closed. Thomas sat down heavily. This is bad, he said quietly. Maybe not. Maybe people just need to talk. You don't understand. If people start leaving, the town collapses. Store can't survive on 12 customers. Bank forecloses. Then I've got nothing. 3 kids and nothing. You've survived this long. Barely. He looked at her. You really leaving soon? Della hesitated. Was planning on it. But nothing. There's always a but. She didn't answer. The day dragged past slow and heavy. More people came into the store. All of them mentioned the meeting. All of them looked at Della like she represented something, hope or change or just difference. She hated it. By evening, the entire town gathered in the church building, 28 people counting the children. Della stood in the back, arms crossed, telling herself she could leave any time. Margaret stood at the front. Everyone knows why we're here, she started. So I'll be direct. This town is dying, has been for years. Question is whether we die here or try something else. There's nothing else, someone called out. There's Oregon. Oregon's 2,000 miles away. California's closer. California's full of people who already took the good land. The room erupted into arguments. Margaret let it go for a minute, then held up her hand. Listen, I know it's hard, I know it's risky, but staying here means watching everything collapse. At least moving means we're trying. Some of us can't move, an old man said. Too old, too poor, too tired. Then we figure out who can and who can't, pool resources, help each other. Help with what? Thomas stood. Most of us don't have resources to pool. We're barely surviving now. Which is why staying guarantees failure, Margaret shot back. At least leaving gives us a chance. The argument went on for an hour. People yelled, people cried, people stared at the floor saying nothing because there was nothing left to say. Finally, Margaret called for a vote. Who's willing to consider leaving? 12 hands went up. Who's definitely staying? 8 hands. The rest didn't vote. Too tired, too scared, too uncertain. We'll meet again next week, Margaret said. Think it through. Talk to your families. Decide what you can live with. The crowd dispersed slowly. Della found herself walking back to the store with Thomas and the kids. Nobody spoke. The night air felt thick enough to choke on. Inside the store, Thomas lit a lamp and sat at his table without looking at the ledger. They're going to leave, he said quietly. Half the town's going to leave, and the rest of us will starve here alone.
Samuel stood in the doorway listening. Lucy held James's hand tight. "We could go too," Samuel said carefully. Thomas looked at him. "Go where?" "Wherever they're going. Oregon, California, somewhere." "With what money? What supplies? What plan?" "I don't know, but staying here feels like giving up. And leaving feels like dying on the trail. We're dying here anyway, just slower." The words hit hard because they were true. Thomas had no answer to that. Nobody did. Della should have stayed quiet, should have let them figure it out themselves, but she heard herself say, "There's another option." Everyone looked at her. "You make the town worth staying for." Thomas laughed bitterly. "How? There's no work, no water, no future." "There's people, there's buildings, there's land. That's more than nothing. That's not enough." "Maybe it could be." "You don't know what you're talking about." "You're right, I don't. But I know giving up guarantees failure and running guarantees nothing." "So what do you suggest?" Della didn't have an answer. She was a drifter, a cook, a woman who survived by not getting attached to places or people or plans. She had no business suggesting anything, but she looked at those 3 kids standing in the doorway, at James holding his mother's spoon, at Lucy trying not to cry, at Samuel trying to be brave. And she thought about how some things mattered even when they didn't make sense. "I don't know," she admitted, "but maybe we figure it out together." Thomas stared at her. "You said you were leaving." "I say a lot of things." "Are you staying?" Della took a breath. This was the moment, the decision point. Leave or stay, safety or risk, alone or involved. "Yeah," she heard herself say, "I'm staying." The word surprised her as much as anyone. Samuel's expression shifted, something like hope flickering behind the suspicion. Lucy smiled through tears. James walked over and held up his spoon. "For cooking?" he asked. Della looked down at him, at this little boy who'd lost everything and still somehow kept going. "Yeah," she said softly. "For cooking." He nodded seriously, then handed her the spoon. "You hold it." "James," Samuel started. "It's okay," James said. "Mama would want someone to use it." The room went completely silent. Thomas covered his face with both hands. Lucy sobbed once and turned away. Samuel's jaw trembled, and Della stood there holding a wooden spoon that meant everything to a little boy who'd just learned how to share his grief. "I'll take good care of it," she promised. James nodded. "I know." Then he walked over to his uncle and climbed into his lap. Thomas held him tight. The other kids joined them, and Della stood there with a wooden spoon in her hand, thinking about how sometimes you stopped running, not because you found what you were looking for, but because you found something that needed you to stay. Outside, the wind picked up. Inside, the lamp burned low. And Creedmore sat in the dark, waiting to see if morning would bring hope or just another day of slow dying. Della looked at the spoon in her hand, then set it carefully on the counter. Tomorrow she'd figure out what staying meant. Tonight she just needed to accept she'd made the choice. For better or worse, she'd stayed. The next morning, Della woke to shouting outside. Not angry shouting, panicked shouting. She rolled off the bedroll and moved to the window fast. Down in the street, 2 men were running toward the well at the center of town. Other people poured out of buildings, all moving in the same direction. Something was wrong. Della climbed down the ladder so fast she nearly missed the last rung. Thomas was already at the door, still buttoning his shirt. "What happened?" she asked. "Don't know." They stepped outside together. Half the town had gathered around the well. Margaret stood at the edge peering down into the darkness. The 2 men who'd been running had a rope and were lowering something. "How deep?" one called down. "Can't see bottom," the other answered. "That's not possible. Water's usually 15 feet down." "Well, it's not there now." Thomas pushed through the crowd. "What's going on?" "Well's dry," Margaret said without looking up. "Completely dry." "That's impossible. We drew water yesterday." "Tell that to the well." The men pulled the bucket back up, empty except for mud at the bottom. "There's nothing," one confirmed. "Just mud and rocks." The crowd went quiet. Then everyone started talking at once. "How can it be dry?" "Underground stream must have shifted." "What do we do?" "Where do we get water?" "The creek's a mile away." "Creek might be dry too." "Then we're dead."
That last statement killed the conversation, because it was true. Towns didn't survive without water. You could survive without work, without money, without hope even, but not without water. Margaret raised her voice. Everyone calm down. We'll send someone to check the creek. And there's other wells. We'll figure this out. When? Someone called. We've got maybe 2 days of stored water. Then what? Then we ration what we have while we find more. And if there isn't more? Margaret didn't answer that. Della watched the crowd, saw fear spreading like infection, saw people who'd been considering leaving suddenly making calculations, saw the death of a town happening in real time. Thomas looked like someone had hit him. This is it, he said quietly. This is how it ends. Don't, Della said. Don't what? Don't acknowledge reality? The well's dry. We can't survive without water. It's over. It's over when you decide it's over. That's not how dying works. Samuel appeared beside them, Lucy and James right behind him. All 3 kids looked scared. Are we leaving now? Samuel asked. Thomas opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I don't know, he finally said. That was somehow worse than yes. The crowd dispersed slowly, people walking away with slumped shoulders and quiet voices. The panic had shifted to resignation, faster than Della expected. Margaret caught her arm as she turned to leave. You know anything about wells? No. Irrigation? Water systems? Anything? I cook. That's it. Margaret nodded like she'd expected that answer, but hoped for a different one. Well, if you think of anything, let me know. Back at the store, Thomas didn't open for business. Just sat at his table staring at nothing. The kids clustered near the counter, whispering among themselves. Della stood in the doorway looking at the street outside. Empty now. Everyone had gone back inside to figure out how to pack their lives into wagons that most of them didn't own. We should check the creek, she said. Thomas didn't respond. Thomas, we should check the creek. Why? If it's dry, we're dead. If it's not, we're just dead slower. That's pathetic. He looked up at her then. Excuse me? I said that's pathetic. You're giving up before you even know what you're dealing with. The well is dry, so we find water somewhere else. There isn't anywhere else. You don't know that. I've lived here my whole life. I know exactly what's here and what isn't. Della walked over and slammed her hand on the table hard enough to make him jump. Then you should also know that lying down and dying helps nobody, especially not those 3 kids. Thomas glanced at Samuel, Lucy, and James. All 3 were watching him with wide eyes. He deflated. You're right. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Do something. Like what? Like checking the damn creek. Samuel straightened. I'll go. No, Thomas said immediately. Why not? I know the way. I can run there and back in an hour. It's too far. It's a mile. I've walked farther. Samuel. I'm going. The boy's voice had an edge to it, desperation maybe, or just the need to do something instead of sitting around waiting for disaster. Thomas looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Fine, but take Lucy with you. I want to go too, James said quietly. Everyone looked at him. He'd barely spoken in 2 days, despite the breakthrough at supper. Now he was volunteering to walk a mile in heat that could kill you if you weren't careful. James, Thomas started, I want to help. Such a small voice, such a big statement. Thomas rubbed his face. All right, all of you go, but stay together. And if the creek is dry, you come straight back. Don't try to go farther looking for water, understood? Understood, Samuel said. They gathered canteens in a small pack with the last of the apples. Lucy held James's hand. Samuel led the way. Della watched them disappear down the road toward the red cliffs. They'll be fine, she said. You don't know that. Neither do you, so pick the option that doesn't make you crazy. Thomas almost smiled. Is that your philosophy? It's kept me breathing this long. He stood and moved to the window, stared out at the empty street. When I was young, this town had 60 people. We had 2 stores, a proper saloon, schoolhouse with an actual teacher. People were building things, starting families. There was a future here. What happened? Mining company pulled out, said the ore wasn't worth the cost. Half the town left immediately. The rest tried to make it work. Farming, ranching, but the land's not great for either. Water's always been scarce. People kept leaving, one family at a time. Until this. Why'd you stay? Where else would I go? This is home, even if it's dying. He turned to look at her. Why'd you really stay? Della didn't answer immediately. She thought about all the towns she'd left, all the places she'd walked away from when things got hard, all the people she'd said goodbye to without looking back. Because I'm tired of running, she finally said. That's it? That's enough. They waited. Minutes crawled past like wounded things. The sun climbed higher. The heat pressed down harder. Della made coffee. Still terrible. Still necessary. Thomas tried to work on his ledger. Gave up after 5 minutes. They didn't talk much. Sometimes silence was easier than filling it with words that didn't help. An hour passed. Then another. They should be back by now, Thomas said. Creek's farther than you think when you're walking. Or something happened. Or they're being careful. But Della was starting to worry too. 2 hours was a long time, even accounting for kids moving slow in heat. Thomas stood. I'm going after them. Give them another 30 minutes. What if 30 minutes? He sat back down, but his leg bounced nervous energy. 20 minutes later, Samuel appeared at the end of the road. Walking. Not running. Lucy beside him, James on Samuel's back again. All 3 of them soaked. Thomas was out the door before Della could move. Are you all right? What happened? Why are you wet? Samuel was grinning, actually grinning. Creek's fine, more than fine. It's higher than I've ever seen it. What? The water level, it's up almost to the banks, like it's been raining upstream for days. But it hasn't rained. I know, but the water's there. Thomas looked like he couldn't process what he was hearing. You're sure? We filled all the canteens, then we waded in because it was hot. The current's strong, water's cold. It's real. Lucy nodded enthusiastically. We splashed James and he laughed. I did, James confirmed. It was cold. Thomas pulled all 3 of them into a hug so tight they protested. When he let go, his eyes were wet. This is good, he said. This is really good. Does it help? Samuel asked. It helps. If the creek's running strong, we can haul water. It'll be work, but we can survive. Della felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief exactly, just less dread. Margaret appeared from somewhere, moving fast for a woman her age. I heard shouting. What's wrong? Nothing, Thomas said. Creek's fine. Water's there. Margaret stopped. You're sure? Kids saw it themselves. She closed her eyes briefly. That's something, at least. It's more than something. It means we have time. Time for what? To haul water a mile every day? That's not sustainable. It's better than dying. Margaret couldn't argue with that. Word spread fast. Within an hour, most of the town knew the creek was running. The immediate panic faded. But the underlying problem remained. One well being dry was manageable if you could haul water. But if the water table was dropping, other wells would follow. And hauling water from a mile away worked for drinking and cooking. Not for much else. That evening, Margaret called another meeting. Smaller this time. Just the people who hadn't already decided to leave. 16 people counting Della and the kids. They gathered in the church again. The space felt too big with so few bodies in it. All right, Margaret started. We've got water at the creek for now, but we need a plan for when that's not enough. What kind of plan? Someone asked. I don't know. That's why we're talking. We could dig another well. With what equipment? What money? We pool resources. We don't have resources to pool. The conversation circled the same drain as before. Lots of problems. No solutions. Della sat in the back, listening, watching people who were trying hard but didn't know what they were trying toward. Finally, she stood. Everyone looked at her. What if you stopped trying to survive and started trying to live? Silence. What does that mean? Margaret asked. It means you're all focused on water, on wells, on the immediate crisis. But you're not asking why anyone would stay even if you solved the water problem. Because it's home, someone said. Home isn't enough. Not when home is dying. You need a reason to rebuild, something that makes Creedmore worth the effort. Like what?
Della didn't have an answer. She'd spoken without thinking. Now everyone was waiting for her to provide solutions she didn't have. I don't know, she admitted, but there has to be something this town can offer that other places can't. Thomas stood. She's right. We can't just survive. We need to give people a reason to come here, to stay here, to invest here. What reason? We don't have mining, don't have good farmland, don't have anything worth selling. We have location, Della said slowly. The idea was forming as she spoke. You're between larger towns. Maybe you become a way station, a place where travelers stop, rest, resupply. We're not on any major routes. Then you make yourself worth the detour. Margaret leaned forward. How? I don't know. Good food, maybe. Cheap rooms. Services travelers need, something that makes stopping here better than pushing through to the next place. The room went quiet. People were thinking. That's not a bad idea, someone finally said. It's a terrible idea, someone else countered. We don't have travelers. We don't have infrastructure. We don't have anything to offer. So we build it, Thomas said. With what? With what we have. We fix up buildings, offer services, spread word that Creedmore is worth stopping at. That'll take months, maybe years. We'll be dead by then. Or we'll have built something. The argument continued, but the tone had shifted. People weren't just talking about leaving anymore. They were considering staying, maybe. After the meeting, people dispersed slowly. Some looked thoughtful. Others looked skeptical. Most looked exhausted. Thomas walked back to the store with Della and the kids. Do you really think that could work? He asked. No idea. That's honest, at least. It's all I've got. Still more than we had yesterday. That night, Della lay in the loft thinking about what she'd suggested. A way station. It was barely an idea, more like the ghost of one. But maybe that was enough to start. She thought about her daughter, about the life she'd lost 8 years ago, about all the choices she'd made since then that led to running instead of staying. Maybe staying was the harder choice. Maybe that's why it mattered. The next morning, she woke to find Thomas already up, writing something at his table. What's that? She asked. List of things we'd need for the way station idea. He looked up. I couldn't sleep. Figured I'd use the time. Della read over his shoulder. The list was long, overwhelming even. That's a lot, she said. Yeah. You really want to try this? I really want to try something. This is as good as anything. It might fail. Everything might fail. At least this way we fail trying. Della nodded. That made sense in a way most things didn't. All right. Where do we start? Thomas looked at her. We? You think you're doing this alone? I thought you were just passing through. I was. Then I stayed. Now I'm helping. Don't make it complicated. He smiled. Actually smiled. Yes, ma'am. Over the next few days, something changed in Creedmore. Slowly, subtly, but definitely. People started talking about the future in present tense instead of past. Margaret organized work crews to haul water from the creek in barrels. It was hard work, hot work. But people did it. Thomas and 2 other men started repairing the old boarding house at the edge of town. The roof leaked. The floors were rotted in places. But the bones were good. Della took over cooking for the work crews. Nothing fancy, just solid meals that kept people going. The kind of food that said someone cared whether you ate or just survived. The kids helped where they could. Samuel hauled water with the adults, trying to prove he was strong enough. Lucy organized the children too young for heavy work into a group that carried messages and small supplies between work sites. And James started talking more. Not constantly, not even frequently, but more. He'd say things like, that board's heavy, or Lucy's fast, or Della makes good bread. Small observations, quiet statements. But each one felt like progress. One afternoon, Della found him sitting near the store holding his mother's spoon. You all right? She asked. He nodded, just remembering. That's okay. It still hurts. Yeah, it probably always will. He looked up at her with those big dark eyes. Does it get better? It gets different. That's the best I can promise. James thought about that, then nodded like it was enough. Okay. He stood and walked over to where she'd been preparing vegetables. Can I help? Della handed him a small knife. Carrots. Cut them in pieces about this big. He worked carefully, tongue poking out in concentration. They didn't talk. Sometimes helping was better than talking anyway. By the end of the second week, progress was visible. The boarding house had a new roof, windows that closed, floors that didn't threaten to collapse. The old saloon got cleaned out. Someone found tables and chairs in a storage shed. They weren't nice, but they were functional.
And Della's kitchen, because that's what everyone started calling it, became the center of everything. People gathered there in the evenings after work, ate together, talked, made plans. It wasn't hope exactly, but it was close enough to keep people moving forward. Then the stranger arrived. Della saw him first, single rider coming from the south, moving slow. Horse looked tired. The man dismounted near the store and tied his horse to the post. Mid-40s maybe? Weathered face? Clothes that had seen too many miles. He walked into the store like he owned it. "Help you?" Thomas asked. "Heard you're fixing up the town, turning it into a way station." Thomas and Della exchanged glances. "Where'd you hear that?" "Spring Valley. Woman there mentioned it. Said Creedmore was trying to make a go of things." "We're trying," Thomas admitted. The stranger looked around. "Doesn't look like much." "It's more than it was." "You got rooms?" "Boarding house up the road, 50 cents a night." The man nodded. "I'll take one. And supper, whatever you're making." "Stew," Della said. "Fine." He paid Thomas and left to settle his horse. After he was gone, Thomas turned to Della. "Word spreading." "Apparently." "That's good, right?" "That's something." But Della felt uneasy. She couldn't explain why. Just a feeling in her gut that said the stranger was trouble wearing regular clothes. That evening she made extra stew. The stranger ate with everyone else in the old saloon. People were curious about news from other towns. He shared some. Prices in Spring Valley, weather conditions on the southern route, gossip about mining companies, normal traveler conversation. But Della watched him. The way his eyes moved, taking in everything, calculating. After supper, he approached her while she was cleaning up. "Good meal," he said. "Thanks." "You the cook here?" "I am." "Town's lucky to have you." He smiled, didn't reach his eyes. "Name's Carson." "Della." "You from around here, Della?" "Passing through originally." "Decided to stay." "Something like that." He nodded like that answered a question he hadn't asked. "Well, town like this needs stability. Someone reliable. Glad you're here." Then he walked away. Della stood there with dirty dishes in her hands, feeling like she'd just been assessed and categorized. She didn't like it. That night, she couldn't sleep. Something about Carson bothered her. Not anything obvious, just a feeling. She'd learned to trust feelings like that. They usually meant trouble was coming, and your brain noticed before you did. Around midnight, she heard voices outside. Quiet voices. She moved to the window. Carson stood in the street talking to two other men she didn't recognize. They'd arrived quietly. No announcement, no checking in. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but their postures were wrong, too casual, like they were trying to look harmless while discussing something that wasn't. After a few minutes, they dispersed. Carson went back to the boarding house. The other two men disappeared into the darkness. Della lay back down but didn't close her eyes. Tomorrow she'd talk to Thomas. Tomorrow she'd mention the uneasy feeling. Tomorrow she'd figure out who Carson really was and what he wanted. But tonight she just watched the ceiling and listened to Creedmore sleep and wondered if they'd accidentally invited something dangerous into a town that couldn't afford any more problems. Outside, the wind picked up, dry wind, the kind that carried dust and trouble in equal measure. And somewhere in the darkness, something laughed. Probably just a coyote. Probably. But Della didn't sleep the rest of the night. Morning came too bright and too quiet. Della climbed down from the loft to find Thomas already awake, standing at the window staring at something outside. "What is it?" she asked. "Carson's still here, and he's got more friends now." She moved beside him and looked out. 5 men total. All gathered near the boarding house, all wearing the same casual posture that looked wrong, like actors playing travelers but forgetting some of the details. "You recognize any of them?" Della asked. "No, but I don't like it." "Neither do I." They watched the men talk for a few minutes. Then the group split up. 2 headed toward the old saloon. One walked toward the creek. Carson and another man stayed near the boarding house. They're scouting, Della said. For what? That's what worries me. Thomas turned to face her. You think they're dangerous? I think there's something, and something's usually worse than nothing in towns this small. Should we ask them to leave? On what grounds? They paid for rooms. They're not causing trouble. Yet. So we just wait? We watch, and we're careful. Samuel appeared from upstairs, Lucy and James right behind him. Who are those men? Samuel asked. Travelers, Thomas said too quickly. They don't look like travelers. What do they look like? Samuel frowned. I don't know, just wrong. Kids notice things adults tried to ignore. Della had learned that years ago. Stay away from them, she said. All of you. Why? Lucy asked. Because I said so. That's not a reason. It's the only one you're getting. Lucy looked mutinous, but nodded. James stayed quiet, watching the men through the window with those big dark eyes. Della made breakfast, eggs, bread, coffee that was slightly less terrible than usual because she'd figured out Thomas's proportions were criminally wrong. Carson showed up while they were eating. Morning, he said pleasantly. Morning, Thomas replied. Mind if I ask you something? Depends what it is. Carson pulled up a chair without being invited. Della's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. This water situation, the well being dry, that a common problem around here? First time it's happened, Thomas said carefully. Interesting. Why? Carson shrugged. Just seems like a hard place to build a way station if water's unreliable. Creek's running fine, for now, but wells don't just go dry for no reason. Something's happening underground, something that might get worse. You a geologist? Just observant. The way he said it made Della's skin crawl. We're managing, she said flatly. Carson looked at her with that same assessing expression from last night. I'm sure you are. Town's lucky to have people who care, who invest time and energy making things better. What do you want? Della asked bluntly. Thomas shot her a look, but she ignored it. Carson smiled. Just making conversation. No, you're not. The smile didn't falter, but something changed in his eyes. Hardness underneath the pleasant exterior. You're direct. I respect that. He stood. I'll be around a few days. Resting my horse. Enjoying the hospitality. Hope that's all right. We don't turn away paying customers, Thomas said. Good to know. Carson left. Thomas waited until the door closed. That was necessary, Della finished. He's playing some kind of game. Better he knows we're not playing along. Or you just made him angry. He was already something worse than angry. Now he just knows where we stand. Samuel had been listening from the stairs. What does he want? He asked. Don't know yet, Della said, but we're going to find out. Margaret came by mid-morning with news that didn't help anyone feel better. 3 more men arrived last night, quiet-like, didn't check in anywhere, just camped near the old mining offices. How many does that make total? Thomas asked. 8 that I've counted. Could be more. 8 men don't just show up in a dying town for no reason, Della said. No, they don't. Margaret looked grim. I asked around. Nobody knows them. Nobody invited them. They just appeared. Like they were waiting for something, Thomas said slowly. Or someone told them to come. Della thought about the way Carson had asked about the water, about the well going dry, about infrastructure and investment. Then it clicked. They want the town, she said. Everyone looked at her. What? Margaret asked. They want Creedmore, or at least they want us gone so they can take it. Why would anyone want a dying town with no water? Because it's not dying anymore. Because we're fixing it. Because word's spreading that there might be a future here. Thomas shook his head. That doesn't make sense. There's nothing valuable here. There's location. You said it yourself. Between larger towns. Right spot for a way station. Maybe they've been watching, waiting for the town to empty out. Then we started rebuilding and complicated their plans. Margaret was quiet for a moment. If that's true, she finally said, we're in trouble. We were already in trouble, Della replied. Now we just know what kind. That afternoon, Della walked through town with purpose. She wasn't just cooking anymore, she was watching. learning layouts, counting people, figuring out sight lines and exit routes, and all the survival instincts she'd developed over years of being a woman alone in places that weren't always safe. She found Samuel near the boarding house, pretending to fix a fence that didn't need fixing. "What are you doing?" she asked quietly. "Same as you, watching." "I told you to stay away from them." "You said stay away, didn't say don't watch." Della wanted to argue, but the kid had a point. "What have you seen?" "Two of them went to the old mining offices this morning, came back with papers, legal-looking papers." "You see what they said?" "No, but they looked important." Della filed that away. "Anything else?" "They keep asking people questions about who owns what, who's staying, who's leaving, like they're taking inventory." "They are. Of what?" "Everything." "They're figuring out what it would take to own this place." Samuel's face darkened. "This is our town." "Towns belong to whoever can hold them. Law only matters if you've got power to back it up." "That's not fair. Fair's got nothing to do with it." She left him there and continued walking. Found the two men Samuel mentioned near the saloon. They looked up as she passed. "Ma'am," one said politely. She nodded and kept walking, but she felt their eyes following her until she turned the corner. By evening, the tension in Creedmore was thick enough to choke on. People gathered for supper at the saloon, but conversation was muted, nervous. Carson and his men ate at a separate table, not causing trouble, just being there, taking up space, making everyone aware of their presence. Della served stew and watched. James stayed close to her, helping in his quiet way. "Those men are bad," he said softly. "Yeah. Are they going to hurt us?" "Not if I can help it." "But maybe." Della crouched down to his level. "Maybe. But maybe is better than definitely. So we're careful and we're smart and we don't give them reasons." "Reasons for what?" "For anything." James nodded like that made sense. Then he picked up more bowls and kept helping. After supper, Carson approached the counter where Della was cleaning. "We need to talk," he said. "About?" "About this town. About where it's going." "I don't own the town. Talk to the people who live here." "I'm talking to the person who matters." Della stopped scrubbing and looked at him. "Excuse me? You're the one holding this place together. Everyone knows it. The kids talk because of you. The work crews eat because of you. People stay because of you. You're the center. I just cook." "You're a lot more than that." He leaned against the counter. "So here's what I'm thinking. My associates and I, we've been looking for an opportunity, a place with potential. Creedmore's got that. Location's good, infrastructure's starting. You've proven people will come. We're not selling. I haven't made an offer yet." "Don't bother." Carson's pleasant expression finally cracked. Just slightly, just enough to show something cold underneath. "You should listen before deciding." "I don't need to listen to know this town isn't for sale." "Everything's for sale if the price is right." "Not this. You don't even live here. You've been here, what, 2 weeks, 3? You're a drifter. Why do you care what happens to Creedmore?" "Because I decided to care." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting." They stared at each other. The saloon had gone quiet. Everyone was listening now. Finally, Carson straightened. "You're making a mistake. I've made worse ones." "Not like this, you haven't." He walked out. His men followed. The door slammed shut. The saloon stayed silent for a moment. Then Thomas spoke. "That was either very brave or very stupid." "Probably both," Della admitted. "What do we do now?" "Now we get ready." "For what?" "For whatever comes next." That night, Della didn't go up to the loft. She stayed in the kitchen with a chair propped under the door handle and a heavy iron pan within reach. Not because she expected immediate violence, because expecting the worst kept you alive longer than hoping for the best. Around midnight, she heard voices outside. She moved to the window carefully. Carson and 4 of his men stood in the street. They weren't being quiet anymore, weren't pretending. They were arguing about something. One man pointed toward the store. Another shook his head. Carson said something sharp that made them all go still. Then they dispersed. But 2 stayed behind, watching the store. Della moved away from the window and checked the back door. Locked, barred. Good. She sat back down with the pan in her lap and waited for morning. Dawn came slow and red. Bad color. Blood color. Della was exhausted but wired. Coffee helped slightly. Not enough. Thomas came down looking like he hadn't slept either. "They're still out there," he said. "I know." "What's the plan?" "Don't have one yet." "That's comforting." "Wasn't trying to comfort you." The kids appeared. All three looked scared but trying to hide it. "Are we in danger?" Lucy asked. Thomas started to say no, but Della cut him off. "Yes." "Della?" "Don't lie to them. They're not stupid." Samuel nodded. "What kind of danger?" "The kind where men want something and don't care how they get it." "What do they want?" "The town. Or us gone. Maybe both." "Can't we just leave?" Lucy asked. "We could," Della said. "But where would we go? And what happens to everyone else here?" "That's not our problem." "Yes, it is, because we decided it was." James walked over and took Della's hand. "We stay," he said quietly. "We fight." Such a small voice saying such big words. Samuel put his hand on his brother's shoulder. "He's right. We stay." Lucy looked between her brothers, then nodded. "Okay, we stay." Thomas looked like someone had knocked the wind out of him. "You don't have to do this," he said to Della. "This isn't your fight." "Yeah, it is. I made it mine when I stayed." "But no buts. We're doing this." Margaret arrived an hour later with 7 other people. Everyone who'd decided to stay and rebuild. They gathered in the store. "We've got a problem," Margaret started. "We know," Thomas said. "Those men aren't leaving, and they're not friendly anymore. One of them tried to buy my forge this morning. When I said no, he suggested I might reconsider. Heavily suggested." "Same here," another man said. "Came by the boarding house, said my rates were too high, said maybe I should close down before something unfortunate happened." The stories continued. Threats disguised as suggestions. Offers backed by intimidation. The message was clear: sell or suffer. "What do we do?" someone asked. Everyone looked at Della. She wanted to say she didn't know, that she was just a cook, that she'd never led anything more complicated than a kitchen, but that wasn't true anymore. "We don't sell," she said. "We don't leave. We make it clear this town isn't theirs to take." "How?" "By being here. By working. By refusing to be scared into nothing. They're bigger than us, more of them, probably armed. Probably, but we've got something they don't." "What's that?" "A reason to stay." It wasn't a great answer, but it was enough to keep people from running immediately. They spent the morning organizing. Men gathered what weapons they could find. Not much. A few old rifles, some knives. Mostly just tools that could double as weapons if necessary. Women inventoried supplies, food, water, medical materials. Kids were sent to watch the roads. Report movement. Della kept cooking because people needed to eat, and having something normal happening felt important. Around noon, Carson appeared at the store door. "Need to talk," he said. "I'm listening," Della replied. "Not here. Outside." "No." "You don't trust me?" "Not even slightly." He smiled like that was fair. "Bring whoever you want. I'll be in the street, unarmed. Just want to talk." He left. Thomas looked at her. "Could be a trap." "Definitely a trap." "So we don't go." "No, we go, but carefully." They walked out together. Thomas, Margaret, Della. Samuel insisted on coming too. Della didn't have energy to argue. Carson stood in the street alone, hands visible, no weapons Della could see. But his men were positioned around the edges, close enough to matter, far enough to seem casual. "Here's how this works," Carson started. "You folks seem like good people, hardworking, trying to make something of a bad situation. I respect that. But you're in over your heads." "We're managing," Margaret said. "For now, but winter's coming, water's still unreliable. You're barely holding on. My offer is generous. We buy the town, fair prices. You walk away with money in your pockets. Nobody gets hurt. Everyone wins." "Except we lose our home," Thomas said. "Home's just a place. You can find another one." "Not like this we can't." Carson's expression hardened. "You're being stubborn about nothing. This town was dying before you started fixing it.
It'll die again, probably sooner than you think. Why do you care? Della asked. If it's so worthless, why do you want it? That's business. Doesn't concern you. It does if you're trying to take it from us. I'm not taking anything. I'm offering to buy. There's a difference.
Not when the offer comes with threats.
Nobody's been threatened. You've just been subtle about it. Carson's pleasant mask dropped completely. Last chance. Sell now, fair prices, or we take it anyway, and you get nothing. Choose. We choose to stay, Della said. Bad choice. We'll risk it. Carson looked at each of them. His eyes lingered on Samuel. That your kid? He asked Thomas. Thomas stiffened. My nephew. Cute. Be a shame if something happened to him.
Samuel stepped forward before anyone could stop him. You threatening me? Carson smiled. Just observing. Kids get hurt all the time. Accidents happen. Touch him and I'll kill you, Della said calmly. Everyone went still. Carson looked at her, really looked at her, seeing something he'd missed before. You mean that, he said. Every word. They stared at each other. Then Carson laughed, short, sharp, mean. All right, we do this the hard way then. He stepped back. You've got till sunset tomorrow. After that, anyone still here is trespassing, and we deal with trespassers permanent-like. He walked away. His men followed. Margaret exhaled slowly. That went well. Could have been worse, Thomas said. How? They could have started shooting already. That's not comforting. They went back inside. The people waiting there knew from their faces it had gone badly. What now? Someone asked. Della looked around the room. At these people who'd decided to stay, to fight for something that probably wasn't worth fighting for by any reasonable measure, but reasonable had stopped applying weeks ago. Now we get ready, she said, because tomorrow night we're going to find out if we mean what we said. That evening passed in strange, quiet preparation. People moved supplies into buildings that could be defended, boarded up windows, reinforced doors. Della cooked a big meal, maybe the last one for a while, maybe the last one period if things went really wrong. Everyone ate together. Nobody talked much. The kids sat close to Thomas. James held his mother's spoon. Lucy kept looking at the door. Samuel tried to appear brave and mostly succeeded. After supper, people dispersed to their positions. Margaret took the forge. Strong building, good sight lines. Two men stayed at the boarding house. High ground, could see most of the street. Thomas insisted on staying at the store with the kids. Della stayed with them. Night fell. Nothing happened. Hours passed in tense silence. Della dozed, sitting up, iron pan still in her lap. Around 3 a.m, James woke her. Fire, he whispered. She was up instantly, orange glow in the distance. The old mining offices, burning. Stay here, she told Thomas. Like hell. Stay with your kids. I'll check it. She ran toward the fire before he could argue. The mining offices were fully engulfed, flames reaching toward the black sky. No one was trying to put it out, because standing between Della and the fire were Carson's men, all 8 of them, watching her. Carson stood at the front. Just a warning, he called over the roar of flames. Tomorrow we burn something that matters. Then they melted back into darkness. Della stood there watching the offices collapse in on themselves. Behind her she heard footsteps. The whole town had come out to watch. Nobody spoke. They just watched their future burn and waited for sunrise to see what was left. The mining offices burned until dawn, leaving nothing but blackened timber and the smell of smoke that wouldn't leave for days. Della stood watching the embers with Margaret and Thomas, while the rest of the town drifted back to their homes in defeated silence. The sky was turning gray at the edges, that ugly pre-dawn color that made everything look worse than it was. Ash floated through the air like dirty snow. They're going to pick us apart one building at a time, Margaret said quietly, until we break. Probably, Della agreed. So what do we do? Stop waiting for them to act, start acting first. Thomas looked at her like she'd suggested flying to the moon. What does that mean? It means they're counting on us being scared, being reactive, waiting for the next fire, the next threat. We change that.
How? We're outnumbered, outgunned, out of options. Della didn't answer immediately. She was thinking, calculating, remembering things she'd learned over years of surviving in places where the law was a suggestion and power belonged to whoever could hold it longest. Those men have been here how long? She asked. 3 days, Margaret said. And in 3 days they've done what? Burned one building? Made threats? Positioned themselves around town, but they haven't actually taken anything yet. Because they're waiting for us to leave. Or because they're waiting for something else. Della turned to face them fully. Men like Carson don't just show up and start burning things unless they've got a plan, a legal plan, something that gives them cover when questions get asked. Thomas frowned. You think they're trying to claim the town officially? I think they're trying to make it look legitimate when they do. Margaret's eyes widened. The papers. The ones Samuel saw them carrying? Exactly. What kind of papers? Deeds maybe? Ownership claims, mining rights, water rights? Something that says they have more right to be here than we do. But that's insane, Thomas said. People live here. You can't just claim a town because you want it. You can if nobody fights you on it. You can if you scare everyone away first. Then you walk in with your forged documents, file your claims, and suddenly it's all legal. Town was abandoned. You were just claiming unused property. Happens more than you'd think. The three of them stood there as the sun climbed higher and the full implications settled in like lead weights. So what do we do? Margaret asked again. Her voice was steady, but Della could hear the fear underneath. Della turned to look at her. We find out what they're planning, and we beat them to it. How? By being smarter than they think we are. She left them there and walked back toward the store. Her mind was working faster than it had in years. Putting pieces together. Seeing patterns she'd learned to recognize in other towns, other situations, other desperate moments when survival came down to thinking faster than the people trying to destroy you. Carson had made a mistake. He'd underestimated her. Underestimated all of them, really. He saw a dying town full of desperate people who'd fold under pressure, run when threatened, disappear when things got hard. But desperation made people dangerous when they had nothing left to lose. And Creedmore had already lost so much that losing more just felt like Thursday. She found Samuel sitting on the store steps, still wearing the same clothes from yesterday, eyes red from smoke and lack of sleep. He was holding a piece of wood, carving it with a small knife. Not making anything in particular, just keeping his hands busy. The shavings fell around his feet in small curls. You holding up? She asked. He shrugged without looking up. I've been worse. That's not an answer. It's the truth, though. Della sat beside him, watched him carve for a moment. The knife moved with practiced ease. He'd done this before, probably something his father taught him back when the world made more sense. You remember those papers you saw? She asked quietly. Yeah. Think you could find where they're keeping them? Samuel stopped carving, looked at her directly. You want me to steal them? I want you to tell me where they are. I'll handle the rest. That's dangerous. Everything's dangerous now. He thought about it, set down the wood and knife. They took them to the boarding house, second floor, room at the end of the hall. I saw them go in yesterday afternoon. Carson's room, probably. Just one room? That's where Carson's staying. But 2 of his men are usually in there with him, guarding or planning or whatever they do when they're not threatening people. How many total in the boarding house? 4 during the day, 6 at night. They rotate. 2 sleep while 4 watch. They're organized, professional. You counted. You told me to watch. Della almost smiled. Good work. You're really going after those papers? Tonight. I'm coming with you. No. You need help. I need you here keeping your siblings safe. They'll be safe with Uncle Thomas. Samuel, I'm coming. His voice had an edge to it. Firm, final. The voice of someone who'd made a decision and wouldn't be talked out of it. You can't stop me. So either I come with you or I follow anyway and probably mess it up because I won't know the plan. Your choice. Della wanted to argue, wanted to send him inside and lock the door and keep him away from danger, the way she'd failed to keep her own daughter away from it years ago. But she recognized that tone. She'd used it herself more times than she could count. And maybe he needed this.
Needed to feel like he was doing something instead of just surviving. Needed to protect instead of being protected. "Fine," she said, "but you do exactly what I say. No improvising, no heroics, no deciding to be brave when smart is better. Understood?" Understood. They spent the day preparing, not obviously. Couldn't let Carson know something was coming. Della cooked like normal. Served meals, acted tired and defeated and beaten down. Let her shoulders slump. Let exhaustion show in her face. But she was watching, timing patrols, counting guards, memorizing positions and patterns and the small details that could mean the difference between success and disaster. Carson and his men had settled into a routine. They thought they'd already won. That made them sloppy, confident, predictable. Margaret came by around noon with information she'd gathered. Talked to Helen, the woman who owns the boarding house. She's terrified. Says Carson paid her triple rate to house his men and triple again to keep her mouth shut about their business. She say what their business was? No. But she did say they've got a rider heading south tomorrow morning, early, before dawn. Carrying the papers probably, filing them wherever claims get filed. County seat, maybe. That's what I figured. Then we move tonight, before they can send anyone. Thomas overheard and pulled Della aside into the back room where they kept dry goods and secrets. "This is insane," he said quietly. "You can't just break into the boarding house and steal from 8 armed men. Watch me." "Della, you got a better idea?" He didn't. His face showed it clearly. The defeat, the fear, the helplessness of watching something you love die and not knowing how to save it. "Then trust me, or don't. But I'm doing this either way." "Why? Why risk your life for a town you didn't even know existed a month ago? For people who aren't your family?" Della didn't have a good answer for that. She'd been asking herself the same question since she decided to stay. Since she started caring about these people, despite every instinct telling her not to. Despite years of learning that caring meant pain and loss meant inevitable. "Because I'm tired of running," she finally said. "Because these kids need to see that sometimes you stand and fight even when it's stupid. Even when you'll probably lose. Because if I don't, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I had. And I'm done wondering. I'm done running. I'm done being the person who leaves before things get hard." Thomas looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Understanding, maybe. Or respect. Or recognition that they were both people who'd lost things and were trying desperately not to lose more. "All right," he said quietly. "What do you need from me?" "A distraction. Something that pulls guards away from the boarding house. Just for a few minutes. Long enough for us to get in and out." "What kind of distraction?" "I'll leave that to you. Just make it loud. Make it look serious. Make them think something's happening somewhere else that needs their attention more than guarding papers." "I can do that." "Don't get yourself killed doing it." "I'll try not to." "Thomas, I mean it. Those kids have lost enough. They can't lose you too." His eyes got wet. He nodded. "I know." That evening passed in slow, grinding tension. Della served supper in the old saloon. The normal people of Creedmore ate quietly, exhausted from another day of hauling water and repairing damage, and wondering how long they could keep going like this before something broke permanently. Carson and his men ate at their usual table, acting like they'd already won, laughing, drinking whiskey they'd brought from somewhere, making jokes Della couldn't hear but could guess the content of from the way they kept looking at the townspeople and smirking. Carson caught her eye once and smiled. That same pleasant, empty smile that didn't reach anywhere near his soul. She didn't smile back, just held his gaze until he looked away first. Small victory. But she'd take it. After supper, she gathered with Thomas, Margaret, and Samuel in the back room of the store. Lucy and James were upstairs sleeping. Thomas had told them nothing. Better that way. Kids couldn't tell what they didn't know, and Della didn't want them carrying this fear. "Here's the plan," Della said, keeping her voice low. "Thomas, you and Margaret start a fire near the old saloon. Small one, contained. Something you can put out yourselves. But enough to get attention, enough to make noise. Soon as Carson's men move to check it out, Samuel and I go in through the boarding house back entrance." "What about the guards inside?" Margaret asked. "We'll handle them." "How?" "Carefully. It wasn't much of a plan." Della knew that. But complicated plans fell apart the moment something unexpected happened. Simple ones at least fell apart in predictable ways that you could react to. Margaret looked skeptical but nodded. All right, when? Midnight, late enough they're tired, early enough we've got darkness to work with. They waited. The hours crawled past like wounded things dragging themselves toward death. Della tried to rest but couldn't. Her mind kept running through scenarios. What could go wrong? What probably would go wrong? How to react when it did? She'd learned over the years that planning for disaster didn't prevent it, but at least made it less surprising. Around 11, she checked her supplies. Heavy iron pan, kitchen knife. Not much for weapons, but better than nothing. She'd fought with less before and survived. Samuel appeared beside her. You ready? She asked. No. Good. Ready people get careless. Scared people stay sharp. I'm definitely scared. So am I. That means we're doing this right. My father used to say fear was just your body getting ready to do something hard. Your father was smart. He was. I wish he was here now. Me too. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Samuel asked, You ever done anything like this before? Breaking into places? Few times. Did it work? I'm still here, so mostly. Mostly doesn't sound great. Mostly's better than never. At midnight, they moved into position. Thomas and Margaret slipped out first, heading toward the saloon with oil and kindling and determination. Della and Samuel waited near the store's back door. The night was darker than usual. New moon, good for sneaking, bad for seeing where you were going. But you took what you got. You remember the plan? Della whispered. Get in, find papers, get out, don't die. That's the basics. What if we can't find them? Then we improvise. I thought you said no improvising. I said you don't improvise. I'm allowed. I'm older and more experienced at doing stupid things. Samuel almost smiled, then tensed. Do you think this is stupid? Objectively? Absolutely. But sometimes stupid's the only option that isn't giving up. And I'm not ready to give up yet. 10 minutes passed. Then they heard shouting from the direction of the saloon, saw orange glow suddenly flaring up against the darkness, heard running footsteps as Carson's men moved to investigate. Fire! Fire at the saloon! Get water! Everyone move! The boarding house front door slammed open. 4 men ran out toward the commotion, pulling on jackets, grabbing weapons, cursing the interruption. Now, Della said. They moved fast and quiet through the back alleys. Della had mapped the route earlier while pretending to hang laundry, knew which buildings had clear paths, which had obstacles, which had dogs that might bark. The boarding house loomed dark ahead of them, only one lamp burning in a downstairs window where Helen probably sat awake and terrified. 2 guards remained, one at the front door watching the fire with his back to them, one somewhere inside. Maybe. They circled around back. The rear door was unlocked. Helen, the owner, had mentioned she never locked it. Fire hazard if people needed to evacuate quickly. Della had counted on that. Small miracle. They slipped inside. The boarding house smelled like old wood and sweat and tobacco smoke and fear. Dark inside except for that single lamp in the front room casting shadows that moved wrong. They moved toward the stairs. A floorboard creaked under Della's foot, loud, sharp, unmistakable. They both froze. Listened. Della's heart was hammering so hard she thought everyone in town could probably hear it. Blood rushing in her ears, breath too loud. Nothing. No response. They kept moving, reached the stairs, started climbing. Every step seemed impossibly loud in the silence, wood groaning under their weight, their breathing harsh in the quiet. 2nd floor. Hallway stretching into darkness like a throat waiting to swallow them. Room at the end of the hall, just like Samuel said. Light showed under the door. Faint. Flickering. Candle, maybe. Or lamp turned low. Voices inside. 2 men talking low. Guard duty conversation. Bored. Tired. Wanting to be somewhere else. Della gestured for Samuel to stay back. He nodded but didn't move far. Close enough to help if needed. Close enough to run if things went wrong. She moved closer to the door, pressed her ear against the wood. The voices became clearer. Should have left yesterday. Boss is getting paranoid about that woman. The cook. Boss is getting rich. We get this filed, We own everything. Buildings, land, water rights, all of it, set for life. If those people leave first, they'll leave. That fire tonight scared them good. Tomorrow we burn the store. Maybe the forge after that. They'll run. Everyone runs eventually. It's just a matter of finding what scares them enough. And if they don't? Pause. Longer this time. Then we make them, permanently. Boss has already said accidents happen, especially to stubborn people. Silence after that. Then one of the men laughed. Cold sound. Mean. The laugh of someone who'd hurt people before and would do it again without losing sleep. You're too soft. These are just farmers and shopkeepers. They're not going to fight. They don't know how. That woman might. The cook. She's got steel in her. I've seen her type before. She's dangerous. She's one person. What's she going to do against 8 of us? She makes stew. We make bodies disappear. Different skill sets. Della chose that moment to kick the door open. It slammed inward hard. One of the men had been standing close to it, leaning against the wall. The door caught him square in the face. Cartilage crunched. Blood sprayed across the wall. He went down hard and stayed down, hands clutching his ruined nose. The second man grabbed for his gun, but Della was faster. She'd brought the iron pan. Heavy, solid, made for cooking but equally good for hitting. She swung it like she meant it, like years of anger and grief and running were all behind the swing, connected with his wrist as his hand closed around the pistol grip. Bone cracked loud enough to hear, sound like a branch snapping. He screamed. She hit him again, harder this time, across the temple, put her whole body into it. His eyes rolled back and he dropped like someone had cut his strings. Samuel stood in the doorway, staring, mouth open. You just help me find the papers. Della cut him off. No time for shock. No time for processing. They could deal with emotions later if they survived. They tore through the room, desk drawers yanked open, contents dumped on the floor, under the bed, behind the dresser, in the wardrobe, every possible hiding place. Footsteps on the stairs below. Someone had heard the screaming, the commotion. We need to hurry, Samuel said, voice tight with panic. I know. Keep looking. More footsteps, closer, heavier, multiple people. Samuel found the leather satchel hidden behind the wardrobe, wedged between the furniture and the wall. Got them. Good. Window. Now. What? We can't go back through the hallway. They're coming up the stairs, out the window. That's a 2-story drop. There's a roof below. I checked earlier. Move. They scrambled to the window. Della got it open just as the door burst inward again. Carson stood there, gun drawn, face twisted with rage that made him look like something other than human. You. Della didn't think, just grabbed the water pitcher from the nightstand and threw it at his face with everything she had. It shattered against his forehead. He stumbled back, blood mixing with water, cursing. She shoved Samuel toward the window. Go! Don't think! Just go! He climbed out, dropped to the lower roof with a thud that sounded too loud. Della followed, swung her legs over the sill. Behind her, Carson was shouting, wiping blood from his eyes. Stop them! They've got the papers! Kill them if you have to! She hit the lower roof hard, ankle twisted. Pain shot up her leg like fire, but she kept moving, had to keep moving. Samuel was already climbing down the support beam at the corner of the building, moving fast and reckless. Della followed, ankle screaming protest but holding. Each step down the beam was agony, but agony was better than death. They hit the ground and ran. Behind them, the boarding house erupted with activity, shouting, confusion, anger. Someone fired a gun. The bullet hit wood somewhere to Della's left, too close, but they were already gone. Into the alleys, into the darkness, running like their lives depended on it because they absolutely did. They made it back to the store just as Carson and his men poured into the street, spreading out to search. Inside, Thomas had barred the door. Margaret was there too, smoke-stained and breathing hard. The fire had been put out. They'd done their part. Now it was time to see if Della and Samuel had done theirs. You get them? Thomas asked, eyes wide with fear and hope. Della held up the satchel, hands shaking. Got them. You're bleeding. I'm fine. You're limping. Also fine. We don't have time for fine. We need to look at these. Margaret took the satchel with hands that were steadier than Della's.
started pulling out papers. Her eyes widened as she read, then narrowed, then widened again. These are deeds, claims, water rights, mining rights, all made out to Carson and his associates, all dated like they filed them months ago. But they're fake, Della said. They have to be. They're good fakes. Margaret kept reading, holding papers up to the lamplight. Really good. Official seals, proper signatures. Someone put real money and effort into these. Someone who knew what they were doing. Doesn't matter if they're fake, Thomas said. Carson still has the originals probably, or can remake these. This just buys us time. Not if we destroy them and make sure everyone knows what he tried to do, Della said. Not if we expose him before he can try again.
Outside, they could hear Carson shouting orders to his men, angry, desperate, dangerous. They're going to come for these, Thomas said. They're going to break down that door and take them back by force. Let them try. Samuel had been looking out the window, staying low so he wouldn't be seen. They're gathering, all 8 of them. They look really mad. Carson's bleeding from his head. Mad people make mistakes, Della said. But her hands were shaking, adrenaline wearing off, reality setting in. Pain from her ankle making it hard to think straight. They'd stolen the papers, but now they were trapped in the store. Outnumbered, outgunned, surrounded. This wasn't over. It was just getting started. Margaret moved to the window beside Samuel, looked out at the gathering men, then at the rest of the town. Dark. Quiet. Everyone hiding, waiting to see what happened next, waiting for someone else to be brave. We need help, she said. We need the whole town. How? Everyone's hiding. Everyone's scared. Then we get them unhiding. We get them scared of the right thing. She grabbed a metal pot from the kitchen, started banging on it with a spoon, loud, rhythmic, impossible to ignore. The emergency bell. Everyone in Creedmore knew that sound. What are you doing? Thomas asked. Calling for help. Everyone knows this sound. They'll come. They have to come. Or they'll stay hidden because 8 armed men are standing in the street ready to kill anyone who interferes. Only one way to find out. She kept banging. The sound echoed through the night, sharp, insistent. A call to action or a death knell, hard to say which. For a long minute, nothing happened. The street stayed empty. The doors stayed closed. The town stayed silent. Della felt something inside her sink. They were alone. They'd always been alone. People talked about community and solidarity, but when violence came, everyone retreated to their own survival. Then a door opened across the street. One of the families that had stayed through everything. The husband stepped out carrying an old rifle. He looked terrified, but he came out anyway. Then another door. Another person. Old man with a walking stick that could double as a weapon. Then another. And another. Within 5 minutes, every person left in Creedmore was standing in the street. 16 people total counting the kids. Not many, but enough to change the equation. Carson saw them gathering. His expression shifted. Calculation, reassessment. The math suddenly didn't work in his favor anymore. He thought he was dealing with scared individuals. Now he was looking at a group. Unified. Armed with whatever they could find. Angry in the way desperate people get when they have nothing left to lose. Different equation entirely. Margaret stepped out onto the store porch. Della tried to stop her, but she shook her off. Thomas moved to follow, but Margaret waved him back. She stood there alone, facing Carson and his men. A middle-aged blacksmith against 8 professional criminals. "We know what you're doing," she called out. Her voice carried across the silent street. "We know about the fake papers, about the claims, about the whole scheme to steal this town." "You don't know anything," Carson shot back, but his voice had less certainty now. "We know enough. We've got your papers, your forged documents, your whole plan laid out in black and white." She held up the satchel so everyone could see. "And come morning, the marshal will know too. We're riding to Spring Valley, filing our own claims, legitimate ones, with real signatures from real residents who actually live here. You can try to stop us, but you'll have to go through all of us to do it." Carson looked at his men, at the townspeople gathering in the street, at the math that suddenly didn't add up in his favor. 8 against 16. Professional criminals against desperate people. Usually an easy win, but desperate people did unpredictable things, fought harder, cared less about surviving and more about taking you with them. "You're bluffing," he said.
but his voice had less conviction now. "You're not writing anywhere. You're going to give me those papers, and I'm going to forget this happened. Walk away. Try again somewhere easier." "We're not giving you anything," Margaret said. "Then I'll take them." "Try." For a moment, Della thought he might attack anyway. Thought violence would solve what words couldn't. Saw his hand tighten on his gun. Saw his men shift into positions, ready to fight. But then one of his men touched his shoulder, said something quiet. Carson's jaw tightened, but he nodded. The calculation had changed. 8 against 16 was one thing, but killing 16 people would bring real law, real consequences. More trouble than any town was worth. "We're leaving," Carson announced. His voice was controlled, but barely. Rage underneath. "Tonight, right now, but hear this. This town's still dying. We just would have made it profitable while it did. You're fighting for nothing, holding on to dust and dreams." "That's our choice to make," Margaret said. "Yeah? And how long you think you'll last? Winter's coming, water's still unreliable, money's still tight. You're just delaying the inevitable." "Maybe. But it's our inevitable. Our town. Our choice." Carson looked like he wanted to argue, wanted to threaten, wanted to make them pay for humiliating him, for ruining his plans, for fighting back when they should have rolled over. But he just turned and walked toward the boarding house. His men followed. Nobody in the street moved, just watched them go in silence. Within an hour they'd packed, saddled horses, loaded supplies. Carson came out last, mounted his horse, looked back at the town one more time. "You'll regret this," he called out. "Maybe," Margaret called back, "but it'll be our regret, not yours." He rode out. His men followed. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the darkness and left them with silence that felt deafening after everything. The town gathered in the street, still holding weapons, still ready for violence that hadn't come. Nobody cheered, nobody celebrated. They just stood there in exhausted silence as the threat disappeared over the horizon and left them with the same problems they'd had before, plus a few new ones. When the sound of horses was completely gone, people started drifting back to their homes. Slowly, quietly, like they couldn't quite believe it was over. Margaret stayed. So did Thomas and the kids, and several others who needed to talk, to process, to figure out what happened next. "That was close," Thomas said quietly. "Too close," Margaret agreed. Della was sitting on the steps, ankle throbbing. Samuel brought her a cloth with cold water and sat beside her. "You should wrap that," he said. "In a minute. You were amazing in there. The way you fought those men. I've never seen anyone move that fast." "I was terrified. Still am." "You didn't look terrified." "Good. I was trying hard not to." Lucy and James appeared. They'd been upstairs during everything, probably heard most of it through the floorboards, probably terrified out of their minds. "Are the bad men gone?" James asked quietly. "Yeah, they're gone." "Are they coming back?" "I don't think so." "What if they do?" Della pulled him close. "Then we'll deal with it. Together. All of us. But I think they're gone for good. Men like that don't come back when they lose. They just find easier targets. And we proved we're not easy." James nodded against her shoulder. "Okay. I believe you." They sat there as the night deepened and the town settled into an uneasy quiet. The crisis had passed, but the future remained uncertain in ways that felt bigger now, more real. The days that followed were strange and difficult in ways Della hadn't expected. The immediate threat was gone, but the underlying problems remained. The well was still dry. Water still had to be hauled from the creek in barrels that got heavier every trip. Money was still tight. The future was still precarious. Winter was still coming. But something fundamental had changed. The town had defended itself, stood together when it mattered, refused to fold when pressed, proved they were worth fighting for even if nobody else thought so. That mattered in ways that were hard to quantify, but impossible to ignore. People started looking at each other differently, with respect, with solidarity, with the understanding that they'd chosen something hard and followed through when running would have been easier. Margaret organized better water rotation, fewer trips with bigger barrels, more efficient systems, less waste. Thomas worked on fixing the store roof that had been leaking for months. Other people helped without being asked, brought materials, shared tools, worked together. Della kept cooking.
feeding work crews, keeping people's energy up, making meals that felt like more than survival, like celebration of being alive and together. And slowly, impossibly, the town started improving. Not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily. Word spread about what happened, how Creedmore had stood up to claim jumpers, how they'd defended their home against people with guns and money and power, how they'd won. 3 weeks later, a family arrived asking if they could stay. They'd heard Creedmore was a place that fought for its own, a place where community meant something. Thomas gave them the boarding house at reduced rate until they got established, helped them move in, made them feel welcome. 2 weeks after that, another family arrived. Then another. Not a flood, just a trickle, but enough to matter, enough to change the population count on the sign at the edge of town. The number climbed. 30, 32, 35. Someone got the old saloon running properly, started serving actual drinks to actual customers who came because they wanted to, not because they were planning to steal everything. A carpenter arrived from somewhere east, said he'd heard there was work, started taking jobs fixing the buildings that had been neglected for years, made them livable again. A school teacher came through, a young woman with more optimism than sense. But she stayed, started teaching the kids proper lessons from actual books. By early winter, Creedmore had 43 people. Not a boomtown, not prosperous, not easy, but alive. Actually alive in ways that mattered. Not just surviving, but building, growing, becoming something. The well stayed dry, but someone found another water source closer to town. Spring-fed pool that had been hidden by brush. Not huge, but enough to supplement the creek. Made hauling easier. Someone else figured out a cistern system, captured rainwater when it fell, stored it for dry periods. Small improvements, practical solutions. The kind of progress that didn't look like much day to day but added up over time. James kept talking more every day. Full conversations now about everything. School, work, ideas, dreams. Still quiet, still thoughtful, but present in ways he hadn't been when Della first arrived. Lucy stayed energetic and curious and occasionally exhausting. She'd taken to helping Della cook, learning recipes, learning techniques, learning that food was love you could serve on a plate. Samuel grew taller, stronger, more confident, starting to look less like a scared boy and more like a young man who'd survived something hard and come out better for it. He'd started helping Thomas run the store, learning business, learning responsibility. Thomas learned to cook, still badly, still capable of burning water if you left him alone too long. But he tried, and sometimes trying mattered more than succeeding. And Della stayed, not because she had to, not because she couldn't leave, but because she didn't want to. Because somewhere between arriving and staying and fighting and bleeding and choosing to care despite every instinct screaming not to, Creedmore had stopped being a dying town she'd wandered into and started being home. One evening, 9 months after Carson left, Della sat on the store steps watching the sunset paint the red cliffs gold and crimson and purple. Thomas joined her with 2 cups of coffee that were actually drinkable now. He'd finally learned the proper ratios. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. "Every day?" "But you don't." "Not yet. Maybe not ever." "What changed?" Della took a sip of coffee, watched the way the light changed the landscape, made everything look possible, made harsh places look beautiful, made dying towns look alive. "I did," she said. "I stopped running from things and started running toward them. Stopped avoiding connections because they might hurt and started accepting that hurt's part of the deal, part of being alive." "That's quite a change." "Had good teachers." "Who?" She gestured at the town, at the light starting to glow in windows, at the smoke rising from chimneys, at the sound of children playing somewhere, at the life happening despite everything that said it shouldn't. "All of you. People who chose hard over easy, staying over running, building over giving up." She paused, "And maybe 3 kids who needed someone to show them that broken things can heal if you give them time and patience and stubbornness." 4 people, Thomas corrected gently. "What?" "Lucy, Samuel, James, and you. You were broken too when you got here. Maybe you needed healing as much as they did." Della wanted to argue but couldn't, because he was right. She'd arrived in Creedmore running from her past, from her daughter's death 8 years ago, from the guilt that never quite faded, from connections that could hurt, from caring about things that could be lost. And somehow in the process of staying, she'd started healing, started feeling again, started believing that maybe surviving wasn't the same as living and maybe she deserved to do both. Maybe, she admitted quietly, maybe I was broken too. Maybe I still am, but less broken than before. That's progress. James appeared in the doorway holding his mother's spoon, not clutching it desperately anymore, just holding it. A memory, a connection, a reminder of love that had been and love that still existed in different forms. Della, is it time for supper? Almost. You want to help? Yes, I want to make the bread tonight. Lucy said she'd teach me. Lucy's teaching you? She's good at bread. Better than you. She's right about that. My bread's terrible. It's not terrible, James said seriously. It's just not great. Thomas laughed. Actually laughed. The sound was good to hear. Lucy came out next, flour in her hair from experimenting in the kitchen. Then Samuel, tired from a day helping unload supplies at the store, but smiling anyway. All five of them sitting together in the fading light. A family of sorts. Not bound by blood, but by choice. By survival. By shared struggle and shared victory and shared meals and shared hope. Not perfect. Not even close. Still messy, still complicated, still carrying scars that would probably never fully fade, but real. And that mattered more than Della had expected when she first rode into town with a lame horse and no plans beyond the next meal and the next town and the next escape from feeling anything. You know what I think? Lucy said suddenly. What? Thomas asked. I think we're going to be okay. Not perfect, not rich, not easy, but okay. And okay's better than I thought we'd get. Samuel snorted. That's setting the bar low. Better than setting it too high and being disappointed. Okay's good. Okay means we're still here, still trying, still fighting for something. Fighting for what exactly? Samuel asked. But he was smiling, playing along. For this. For family. For home. For proving that people who care about each other can survive things that should break them. That's very philosophical, Samuel said. I learned it from Della. Everyone looked at Della. She shrugged. Don't look at me. I'm just the cook. You're more than that, James said quietly. You're the reason we're still here. The reason the town's still here. The reason I can talk again. James, it's true. Everyone knows it. You came here with nothing and gave us everything. Gave us hope. That's worth more than money or buildings or anything. Della felt her throat tighten, didn't trust herself to speak. Thomas saved her. Come on, let's make supper before we all start crying and embarrass ourselves. They went inside together. And in the kitchen, Della started cooking while the children helped, and James hummed that old surviving song, and Lucy laughed at something Samuel said, and Thomas checked supplies with the careful attention of someone planning for a future he finally believed in. Outside, Creedmore settled into evening. Lights in windows, smoke from chimneys, voices calling goodnight. The sounds of a town that was alive and intended to stay that way. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And real was enough. Della worked the dough for bread, hands moving with practiced ease, thinking about the journey that brought her here. All the towns she'd left, all the people she'd said goodbye to, all the years spent running, and how she'd finally stopped. Not because she found paradise, but because she found people worth staying for, a place worth fighting for. A reason to believe that broken things could heal and dying towns could live, and people who'd lost everything could still build something new. The bread went into the oven. The stew simmered on the stove. The kitchen filled with smells that meant home in ways that had nothing to do with buildings and everything to do with the people inside them. They ate together. All five of them plus 3 neighbors who stopped by and ended up staying because that's what happened in Creedmore now. Meals became gatherings. Gatherings became community. Community became the thing that held them together when everything else tried to tear them apart. After supper, after cleaning up, after everyone else had gone home or upstairs to bed, Della stood on the store porch looking at her town. Her town. When had she started thinking of it that way? Hard to say. Somewhere between arriving and staying and fighting and choosing to care. The street was quiet now, peaceful, the kind of quiet that felt like rest instead of abandonment. She thought about Carson and his men, about the threat they'd represented, about how close Creedmore had come to disappearing. But they'd survived. They'd fought back. They'd chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier, and in doing so they'd proved something important. That communities weren't just places. They were choices. Daily decisions to show up, to help, to care, to fight for something bigger than yourself. That home wasn't where you were born or where you ended up by accident. It was where you decided to belong. That family wasn't just blood. It was who you chose to stand beside when everything went wrong. Della had spent years running from those truths, years believing that not caring meant not hurting, that staying meant losing, that connections were just opportunities for pain. She'd been wrong. The pain came anyway. Whether you cared or not, whether you stayed or ran, the grief found you, but so did the joy, the belonging, the purpose, the feeling of being part of something that mattered. She just had to stop running long enough to let it catch up. The door opened behind her. Thomas stepped out. "Thought you might want company," he said. "I'm good." "I know, that's why I came out." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one, listening to the night sounds of a living town. "Thank you," Thomas said eventually. "For what?"
For staying, for fighting, for teaching my kids that giving up isn't the only option. I didn't do that. Yeah, you did. Whether you meant to or not, you showed them something I couldn't. That strength comes in different forms. That sometimes the bravest thing is just showing up. That broken doesn't mean useless. Della didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. They stood there a while longer. Then Thomas went back inside, leaving her alone with the night and her thoughts. And Della stood on that porch in that dying but now living town and felt something she hadn't felt in 8 years. Peace, not happiness. That was too simple, too easy. But peace, the kind that came from accepting where you were and who you were and what you'd survived. The kind that came from choosing to stay, from choosing to care, from choosing to believe that tomorrow might be hard, but at least you wouldn't face it alone. She went inside eventually, climbed up to the loft, lay down on the bedroll that was more comfortable now because someone had added blankets and a real pillow. Small kindness, the kind that mattered most. She closed her eyes and listened to Creedmore sleep, heard Thomas moving around below, heard the kids breathing in the room above, heard the town settling in for another night. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Della fell asleep without running through escape routes in her mind, without planning the next town, without keeping one foot already out the door. She fell asleep home. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.